Okay.
right
We're
there.
recording and you are spotlighted, Bob, so it's all yours.
Well, this is an appropriate lesson, I think, for tonight because we're going to look at the chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Numbers. And this is where God sets apart the tribe of Levi as not only the priest, the high priest, but also all the workers that take care of the tabernacle and help Aaron and his sons perform the services and do the other things that are necessary for on behalf of the whole community to worship God and to uh, maintain that covenant relationship between God's people, the Israelites, and God, that He established that covenant relationship in the wilderness at the base of Mount Sinai. Last week, we focused on what I called the third phase of Israel's redemptive journey to the promised land. We really focused on the first two chapters of the book of Numbers, which really talked about how God organized his army. The first phase of Israel's redemptive journey was God redeeming his people from the bondage in Egypt. And this is through the 10 plagues and then the evening of Passover. The second phase was God establishing Israel as a nation by giving Israel his law and by entering into that covenant relationship between God and his people. The third phase, which we discussed and focused on last week, was God preparing his people to journey through the wilderness and to conquer the kingdoms in the promised land. This is the land that God promised to his people. The main message that we got from last week's study was how God assumed command over his people, illustrated how God continues to command and rule over his church today by calling, employing, and working through those he chooses to call to carry out his redemptive plan. As Pastor put it last week, God chooses to work through people that he chooses. This week, we're going to focus on how God redeemed and set apart the firstborn sons of Jacob by separating the tribe of Levi from the other 12 tribes and substituting the tribe of Levi for the firstborn of all the other tribes. The main message that I want you to get from tonight's lesson, Numbers chapters 3 and 4 teaches believers that God designates and sets apart specific persons to accomplish his purpose and will. God's plan of redemption includes providing each person who God calls as his own with gifts and responsibilities to accomplish God's plan. So we're going to focus on what God gives us as gifts and calls us to do in service to him when he chooses us as his own. The outline of what we're going to cover is: first, God set apart the descendants of Levi as his own. Second, God commanded Moses and Aaron to take a census of the firstborn of the descendants of Levi's 3 sons and allocated specific responsibilities to each clan. Third, God commanded Moses and Aaron to take a census of the firstborn of the other 12 tribes of Israel and to collect a ransom for the number of firstborn in the other tribes in excess of the number of the firstborn in the tribe of Levi. Then we'll conclude with discussion questions and conclusions and applications. If you note in the outline, there's going to be 2 separate censuses. One taken of the firstborn of the sons of Levi, and the other one is to take a census of the tribes of the other 12 tribes to compare the firstborn against the tribe of Levites in order to equalize the setting apart of the tribe of Levi to serve God. So in the first part, we're going to talk about is God set apart the descendants of Levi as his own. Now, when we studied in Genesis and we talked about Jacob, we talked about his 12 sons. The first son was Reuben, the second was Simeon, and the third one was Levi. So Levi was the third son. And when we talk today about the 12 tribes of Israel, we don't really mention the Levites. The 12 tribes included removing Joseph and Levi and substituting them for Manasseh and Ephraim. which were the sons of Joseph that were blessed by Jacob and adopted by Jacob as his own children.
I adopt you too, buddy.
Now, in Exodus 13, we're going to go back because if you remember, we're going to tie into the God's redeeming his people from their bondage in Egypt and the Passover night. In Exodus 13, verses 1 and 2, the Lord claimed for himself the firstborn of all the Israeli people that were taken out of Egypt. The scriptures say the Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me, set apart, every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether man or animal. So what God had done is he spared the firstborn of the Hebrew children from the 10th plague in Egypt when the angel of death passed over the households that were painted in the door frames with the blood of the lamb. And for the households in Egypt that didn't paint the blood of the lamb over their doorposts, then the angel of death took the firstborn of the Egyptian. And so God said, I took the lives of the firstborn of the Egyptians, but with the blood of the lamb, I passed over the firstborn of all the households of the Israelites that painted their doorposts. And I claimed that firstborn, all those firstborn, they belong to me because I spared them from the plague. So when God destroyed the firstborn of the Egyptians, he saved the firstborn of Israel and claimed the firstborn as belonging to him. In Numbers 3, verses 11 through 13, the book of Numbers refers back to what God had said to Moses when the Passover took place. But the Lord said to Moses, I have taken the Levites from among the Israelites in place of the first male offerings of every Israelite woman. The Levites are mine, for all the firstborn are mine. When I struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, I set apart for myself every firstborn in Israel, whether man or animal. They are to be mine. I am the Lord. Basically, the Lord says, I am in charge here. I'm God, and I choose when the plagues attacked the firstborn of the Egyptians, I chose all the firstborn of the Israelites to be mine. But what we're seeing here in the book of Numbers is now God is going to substitute the firstborn of all the Israelite families, and he's going to replace them with the tribe of Levi. So Levi is being set apart and substituted for the firstborn that God claimed from all the households in Israel. So instead of setting apart the firstborn of every Hebrew family to serve the Lord in the tabernacle, God exchanged them for the tribe of the Levites. So the Levites take the place of what God claimed in the Passover as the firstborn of all the Hebrew families. Now, God distinguished and set apart Aaron and his sons from the other descendants. So what we see God doing here is he separates the Levites, and now he's going to separate Aaron and Aaron's sons. Moses and Aaron were descendants of Levi, who was the third son of Jacob. Moses and Aaron were initially called and set apart to lead Israel out of Egypt to the promised land. Moses was the first member of the tribe of Levi to be called out by God. And he was called out with a specific purpose of speaking for God and leading God's chosen people out of their bondage of Egypt and leading them to the promised land. Aaron was the second member of the tribe of Levi, called out by God to serve as the first high priest in the tabernacle. Moses and Aaron were the beginning of God's separation of the tribe of Levi from the other 12 tribes. In the book of Numbers, God chose the sons of Aaron to serve after Aaron as a high priest in the tabernacle. So it's Aaron's sons, his specific descendants, that in line become the high priest up until the time of Jesus. God says in Numbers 3, verse 10, appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary must be put to death. Now, we recall that initially Aaron had 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. And if you recall, Nadab and Abihu were consumed by fire when they offered strange fire to the Lord. In Numbers 3, verses 2 and 4, the scriptures recall what had happened earlier and the result of what sons were left. The names of the son of Aaron were Nadab, the firstborn, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Those were the names of Aaron's sons, the anointed priests, who were ordained to serve as priests. Nadab and Abihu, however, fell dead before the Lord when they made an offering with unauthorized fire before him in the desert of Sinai. They had no sons, so only Eleazar and Ithamar served as priests during the lifetime of their father Aaron. So the two of the sons, the firstborn and the secondborn, they were consumed by fire because and if you remember when we studied this part of the book of Exodus, that they were probably drinking. They weren't authorized to approach the tabernacle. They took and made their own fire. They probably didn't take it from the brazen altar, which is the only authorized fire that God would recognize. And they were consumed because they were not worshiping God in the way that God uh, instructed Moses to tell Aaron and his sons to do. So what we had is we have a separation. Moses and Aaron. Aaron and his sons are set apart to be the priests, and then two of the sons are killed, and there's two remaining sons. Now, God designated and gave a specific mission to the three clans that descended from Levi. When I say that the hierarchy, we start with the tribes that come from the 12 sons of Jacob. And then from the tribes, we have clans. And from the clans, we have families. Well, when we look at Jacob's third son, Levi, he had three sons. And they become the three clans that we're going to talk about tonight. All the descendants of the tribe of Levi were set apart and given to Aaron and his descendants to assist them as the priests and to perform the work to take care of and transport the tabernacle and its furnishings. Aaron and his sons were the priests. All the other Levites were to serve Aaron and take care of the tabernacle. In Numbers 3, verses 5 through 9, the Lord's instructions to Moses were, the Lord said to Moses, bring the tribe of Levi and present them to Aaron, the priest, to assist him. They are to perform duties for him and for the whole community at the tent of meeting by doing the work of the tabernacle. They are to take care of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, fulfilling the obligations of the Israelites by doing the work of the tabernacle. Give the Levites to Aaron and his sons. They are the Israelites who are to be given wholly to him. So what all of Egypt, all of the Israelites owed God duties to the tabernacle, duties of worship. However, God substituted the tribe of Levi to perform those duties on behalf of the other tribes. And so they're not only serving on behalf of Aaron and performing the work functions of the tabernacle, they're also acting on behalf of the whole community. Remember, the firstborn of all the Israelites were claimed by God, and the Levites substituted for the firstborn. So God set aside the entire tribe of Levi to serve God by serving Aaron, Aaron's sons, and the other 12 tribes by doing all the labor-intensive tasks which God assigned to them. Now, just as the firstborn of all of Hebrew families belonged to God, by substitution, the Levites who were substituted for the firstborn of the other tribes took their place and were set apart to serve Aaron and the whole community. They belonged to God. The Levite tribe was divided into three clans according to their relationship to the three sons of Levi. Those three sons were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And that's taken from Numbers 3:17. God assigned specific duties and responsibilities to each of these three clans. So in the second part of our outline, we're going to talk about these three clans and the assigned duties that they had with respect to the tabernacle. God commanded Moses and Aaron to take a census of the firstborn of the descendants of Levi's three sons and allocated specific responsibilities to each clan. Now, what basically God instructed Moses to do is to count every Levite male who was at least 1 month old, including Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. So what he was doing is counting every Levite male 1 month or older. Symbolically, then, if you're set apart in the tribe of Levi to serve God, it's a lifelong responsibility from birth till death. Now, the number of the firstborn males who were counted over 1 month old was 22,000. Essentially, God was setting apart from these males from birth to serve God for their entire lives. Then God ordered Moses and Aaron to conduct a separate count of all men from 30 years old to 50 years old in each clan. These are the men who actually did the work. Although every male in the tribe of Levi was set apart to serve and worship God for life, the actual work that we're going to talk about were done by those males that were between the ages of 30 and 50. When did Jesus start his ministry? Most scholars say that it was at age 30. So we're going to start with the Gershonite clan. Now, Gershon was the oldest son of Levi. The total number of males over 1 month old counted in the census of the Gershonite clan was 7,500. And the number of males between age 30 and 50 was 2,630. We're going to talk about how these numbers fit into the big picture. The Gershonites were assigned the position of encampment on the west side or on the back side of the tabernacle. If you remember, the front of the tabernacle faced east and the back side was on the west side. The Gershonites camped between the tabernacle and the camp of Ephraim. Remember, 3 tribes under the guidance or the leadership of Ephraim camped on the west side of the tabernacle. The leader of the families of the Gershonite clan was Eliasaph. And those, we're going to see these names show up 1 or 2 times more in the future. Now, the Gershonites were assigned the responsibility to take down, carry, and reassemble the tabernacle and the tent of the meeting. They were in charge of the tabernacle itself and the curtains around the courtyard. They were responsible for taking down, transporting, and reassembly of the 4 coverings of the tabernacle, the curtain for the outer door of the tabernacle, that's the entrance to the tabernacle itself, and for the curtains of the courtyard surrounding the tabernacle and the brazen altar. So they basically were the curtain people. They hung the curtains, they took the curtains down, they took the coverings down, and they were responsible for transporting or carrying them when God lifted the cloud and the encampment was told to move. They were not responsible for the veil between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. They were not responsible for the boards and bases which were used to frame the tabernacle, and they were not responsible for the poles used for the fence around the courtyard. They were responsible for the fasteners used to hang the outer curtain and for the brass pins and stakes which were driven in the ground to tighten the coverings. If you remember, they had 4 coverings over the tabernacle, and they used ropes to pin them down on the side so that the tabernacle would be stabilized and it wouldn't blow in the wind. Now, that's a lot of heavy lifting. And so the Gershonites were given wagons to transport these heavy coverings, outer door curtains, and the white linen used for the fence around the courtyard. So that's a labor intensive task in connection with the assembly and taking down and transport of the cloth materials of the tabernacle, not including the veil. Now we're going to talk about the Korathite clan. Korath was the second oldest son of Levi. The total number of males 1 month or older counted in the census of the Korahite clan was 8,600. The number of males between age 30 and 50 was 2,750. Now the Korahites were assigned the position in the encampment on the south side of the tabernacle. This, you're looking at the tabernacle, would be on the right side of the tabernacle, the south side, and they were between the tabernacle and the camp of Reuben. This was a place of honor, and you can see why it was a place of honor with the responsibilities that were assigned to the Korathites. The leader was Eliasaph, And the Korathites were assigned the responsibility to take charge of and carry the holy vessels and items used in the inner sanctuary, including the furnishings in the holy place. Remember the three furnishings: the golden altar of incense, the golden candlestand, and the table of showbread, and all the utensils and articles, the veil and the Ark of the Covenant, and including the brazen altar in the courtyard. So all those furnishings were transported by the Korathites. However, they were not to look at these furnishings and they were not to touch them. These furnishings and these things were taken and covered by Aaron and his sons, the priests. If you remember, God only allowed the priests to have contact with the holiest of his furnishings. So the Aaron and his sons were responsible to take down the shielding curtain or the veil and cover the ark of the testimony with it. So the first thing that they do is they go into the tabernacle, they would take down the veil and they would cover the ark of the testimony. Then they were instructed to cover the ark of the covenant with hides of sea cows, and finally spread a cloth of solid blue over those coverings and insert the poles in the hooks or the circles that the poles were inserted in to carry the ark. So when you saw the ark of the covenant being transported, it was the only thing being transported that was covered with a blue covering. Everybody knew that that blue covering, what was underneath it, was the ark of the covenant. Remember, nobody else was able to look on or touch any of these holy vessels. Then God gave instructions on how to cover and carry the other holy items of the tabernacle. It was Aaron and his sons that were tasked with covering these holy furnishings and all the holy articles. When the camp was ready to move and all these vessels and furnishings were properly covered, then the Korathites were tasked to carry the items. Now, the instructions for the table of the presence or the showbread were given in Numbers chapter 4, verses 7 through 8, as follows: spread a blue cloth and put it on the plates, dishes, and bowls, and the jars of the drink offerings. The bread that is continual there is to remain on it. Over these, they are to spread a scarlet cloth, cover that with hides of sea cows, and put poles in its place. The table of showbread had round hooks that the poles were inserted in. So the utensils and the bread itself was covered, and then it was over that there's a it looked on the outside, it was the hides of sea cows. The poles were put in place so the Korathites could come and take it. The instructions for the golden lampstand were given in Numbers 4, verses 9 through 10. They are to take a blue cloth and cover the lampstand that is for light, together with its lamps, its wick trimmers and trays, all of its jars for the oil used to supply it. They are to wrap it and all its accessory in a covering of hides of sea cows and put it on a carrying frame. The lampstand didn't have hooks in it for the poles to be inserted, so it was put on a frame, and then the frame was carried by the Korathites. Now, the golden altar of incense, the instructions for it is in Numbers chapter 4, verses 11. Over the gold altar, they are to spread a blue cloth and cover that with hides of sea cows and put poles in its place. If you remember, the altar of incense did have places where they could insert the poles and use the poles to carry it. Again, all three of these furnishings that were in the holy place were covered by a blue cloth and ultimately covered by the hides of sea cows, and then they were carried either on a frame or on the poles. Now, what about all the other articles used for ministering in the sanctuary? They were all to be wrapped in a blue cloth, covered with hides of sea cows, and placed on a carrying frame. Then, this is interesting. The ashes from the bronze altar were removed and then covered by a purple cloth on top of the ashes. And the ashes, once they were covered with the purple cloth, they were instructed to place all the utensils for the brazen altar on top of that. That included the fire pans, meat forks, shovels, and sprinkling bowls. All these items were covered by hides of sea cows and placed on the bronze altar. And the bronze altar, they inserted poles. and then they carried it. Now, unlike the Gershonites, and we're going to talk about the Merarites, there were no wagons assigned to the Korahites. They had to carry all of these items either by poles or poles inserted to frames, and so they had to be carried by hand. If you remember later in the Bible, we studied when the Philistines decided to return the Ark of the Covenant to the Israelites. They had taken it in battle, and they were getting all sorts of uh, blisters or what, and so they decided that they would return it. When the Israelites they returned it, they put it on a wagon and put a milking cow, to take it back to Israel. These cows left their calves and they walked toward the Israelites. But when the Israelites took possession on it, one of the Israelites thought that the cart was going to tip over and touched it and was killed. The Israelites were instructed by God how to carry the furnishings of the tabernacle. They were not to put it in a wagon and carry it. They were supposed to hand carry it, and only the Korathites could carry it. So that was the problem, is that they weren't following God's instructions. The Philistines, they're a pagan nation, and they were not held to get God's standard. Now, as I mentioned, the Korathites were admonished under penalty of death not to touch or even look at the holy things. They were placed under the direct supervision of Aaron. And it's interesting that Moses and Aaron descended from the second oldest son, Korath. Now we're going to talk about the third and final clan, the Merarite clan. Merari was the youngest son of Levi. The total number of males 1 month or older counted in the census of the Merarite clan was 6,200. The number of males between the age 30 and 50 was 8,580, almost double the combined number for both of the other clans. The Merarites were assigned the position of encampment on the north side of the tabernacle, between the tabernacle and the camp of Dan. The chief of the families of the Merarite clan was Zuriel. Now, they were assigned the responsibility to take charge of and carry the boards, which are the frames of the tabernacle, including the bars, pillars, sockets, those silver bases, and all the equipment, tent pegs, and ropes associated with the frames of the tabernacle and the fencing around the courtyard. They were the, if you will, the young apprentice laborers for the tabernacle. They did all the heavy lifting because those were the heaviest parts of the tabernacle. And because they were the heaviest, they were allocated the most wagons to transport them. Note that the Merarite clan had the largest number of men between the age of 30 and 50. They had the most work to do. And so theirs was an important responsibility, but it was the most menial of all the responsibility. It's important to know what these different clans and their assigned responsibilities, because later in the book of Numbers, we're going to see how some people assigned to some of these positions, the more menial of the positions, rebelled against Moses, rebelled against, basically saying, why can't I have the better jobs? And we're going to see the consequence of that rebellion. Now, the count for the three clans totaled more than the aggregate total of 22,000. If you go back and add up the numbers of the firstborn, you're going to find out that the total of the count for the three tribes is more than 22,000. Some scholars say that that was a typographical or a mistake. Some say that there are some people counted in the individual tribes that really don't count in the overall number. Through all the research I could do, and there really isn't a good explanation for the difference in number, except that the number of 22,000 is used by God later, which we're going to talk about this right now, to make an adjustment between the firstborn of the 12 tribes of Israel compared to the firstborn of the tribe of Levi. So in the fourth section, we're going to talk about God commanded Moses and Aaron to take a census of the firstborn of the other 12 tribes and to collect a ransom for the number of firstborn in the other tribes in excess of the number of firstborn in the Levite tribe. So God's going to count all the firstborn. remember, they all belong to God in the first place because of the Passover, and he saved the firstborn. But now he took and set apart the Levites in substitute for the firstborn, but then he takes another count of the firstborn, and there are more firstborn from the other 12 tribes than there are the firstborn of the tribe of Levites. And so after counting all the firstborn male children of the tribe of Levi, God commanded Moses to count the other firstborn male children of the other tribes. And this we get from Numbers chapter 3, verses 40 and 41. The Lord said to Moses, count all the firstborn Israelite males who are a month old or more and make a list of their names. Take the Levites for me in place of all the firstborn of the Israelites, and the livestock of the Levites in place of all the firstborn livestock of the Israelites. I am the Lord. So what it's important because he's not only taking account of the firstborn of all the other tribes, but by name. Why by name? That determines who's going to pay the ransom for the excess. The total number of the firstborn males of the other 12 tribes was 22,273, or 273 firstborn of the other tribes, more than the firstborn of the tribe of Levi. Moses was also directed to take account of the firstborn livestock of the other 12 tribes. Why? Because God claimed the firstborn of the Hebrew families and the firstborn of the livestock. And the firstborn of the livestock, there was an adjustment as well, although the scriptures don't really go into detail on that. So God commanded the other 12 tribes to make a payment to the tribe of Levites as a redemption or ransom for the 273 more firstborn of the other tribes. Tribes to redeem. That's 46 through 48. To redeem the 273 firstborn Israelites who exceed the number of Levites, collect 5 shekels for each one, according to the sanctuary shekel, which weighs 20 geas. Give the money for the redemption of the additional Israelites to Aaron and his sons. This is basically an excess firstborn poll tax. As we discussed before, the shekel represented a weight, not a coin. Moses collected silver weighing equivalent of 1,365 shekels, which is 5 times 273. So this is a lot of detail that's in the book of Numbers, but it lays the groundwork for some of the events that we're going to look into in the book of Numbers down the road, the rebellion and the consequences of the rebellion. And and as I discussed before, these consequences and these instructions were carried forward even to the time of the kings of Israel, when, if you remember, and we talked about when the Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines and returned, and then they were improperly touching and looking upon the Ark of the Covenant in the wagon. So these are instructions that God instructed Moses and Aaron, and it was to be passed down to the rest of the history of Israel as a nation. So with that instruction, we're going to go into 2 discussion questions. And again, we're going to follow the procedure. Occasions, God calls upon his chosen to be responsible to accomplish specific tasks to further his purpose and will. Members of God's community are called to carry out specific tasks which God assigns to them. The members of God's church are given different gifts and levels of responsibility. Some are called to sow, and others are called to reap. Some are given gifts of teaching, others gifts of preaching, others different gifts, which joined together accomplish God's will and purpose.
Right.
Ultimately, our church leaders are given responsibility to oversee and supervise how the gifts are to be used in the church for God's purposes to carry out God's will. So this is not one of the most exciting lessons. We're going to get into some real juicy stuff in the future, but there are some concepts here that I think that are instructive for us in the church.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bob. That was great.